Okay, so I wanted to talk about necromancy or the powers inherent in necromancy, who is wielding necromancy, what it really means. And if you look below, I've got a loose definition for necromancy being able the ability to control, communicate, and reanimate the dead. Typically, we associate those abilities with this type of imagery, right? The voodoo goddess. And in this case, it's Nana Baluku, and she has control over death or the underworld. And also the idea of voodoo, where in Haitian mythology, where they were able to bring the dead back who served. Now there's mythology of them using that in their revolution against the French. That's how they were actually able to conquer, by bringing people back from the dead to fight for them again. And so that'll bring up 2 points, right? The real power behind necromancy will be in 2 points that I'm going to raise here. If I can get this, click OK. So if you can see that, that is necromancy yields knowledge and the ability to build armies. So we're going to talk about the two capacities of necromancy. And we can see this is a zombie army, right, of a different type of creation. But again, the idea of having that massive army at your disposal, right? Having this complete control. Nothing is more loyal than an army of the undead, right? This is an army of the undead from the Greek tales of Jason of the Argonaut. So even in the Greeks, they were talking about ultimately this ability to control the dead and how much power these guys will fight to the end, right? No pain. They're going to keep going until they get the mission done, right? Also in necromancy, that second part is being able to communicate with the dead. And this is what T'Challa from the Black Panther series is manifesting when he goes to the astral plane. He's able to talk to his father. His sister is able to do that same feat in the later movies. And then we see this is a scene out of Dungeons and Dragons where they use a magical amulet to bring the dead back so they can talk to them and find out about this war. Hellboy even uses necromancy to bring this old guy back. This is a scene out of Hellboy 2. And again, what are you gaining here? Well, it's access to knowledge. One of the first points about why people even utilize necromancy. This is primarily having that access to information, and that's what it gives us. So T'Challa, Shuri practicing necromancy, Hellboy practicing necromancy, the wizard here practicing necromancy. Okay, so we can see it's pretty prevalent, and necromancy goes at a couple of ways. Like the Christian beliefs also show reanimation of the corpse. After Jesus died, the resurrection, he is reanimated. That falls squarely into the line of necromancy. Gone for 3 days, brought back to life. Necromancy. Okay. Now, typically, when we think, we'll come back to these voodoo images here. Necromancy also through magic welding. This is Ash of the Evil Dead series, and we see that by reading this book, the Necronomicon, which is called the Book of the Dead. They unleash these deadites. And these deadites are basically dead beings who have come back to life. A dead corpse has come back to life. That is the central power of the deadites. And the deadites, it's in their strength, it's in their army. And they would get several movies all about being able to use this magical book to reanimate dead corpses. Morgan Le Fay, obviously the sorceress, was known for wielding magic. Now, this is a very interesting and powerful image here, because this is a depiction of Aset and Nephthys who are performing the ritual on Osiris, the mummy, after he has died, and they are using magical energy to resurrect him. So this is necromancy. They assembled his dead body, they created the first mummy, they used their powerful magic. Remember, Aset is the nectar of magic. She is the most powerful magic wielder in the Kemetic pantheons, which may make her the most powerful of all of them. But you can see these two goddesses combining their powers together, considerable magic, and ultimately bring Asar back from the dead. Remember, he is in the underworld. He comes back, and they, conjoin together and produce a son. So that is not necromancy at the highest level. We also see this is Inanna of Sumerian beliefs. And you can see I've got this little notice up here in the corner, right, about where it's been practiced as far as necromancy. Ancient Persia, Greece, Rome, and medieval Europe, but also thoroughly in Africa, in the northern parts, and into what they call the Middle East. Because Inanna here, who is the Sumerian goddess of heaven, also is infamously quoted as saying, "I shall smash up the doorposts and overturn the doors. I shall raise up the dead, and they shall eat the living, and the dead shall outnumber the living." Clearly, she's talking about controlling the dead, necromancy. So among that god realm, this is clearly a power that gods have been wielding to build armies and do things like that for themselves. And that's what Inanna was talking about, building herself an army. Okay. Persephone, through her underworld connection, has control over the dead in the underworld. She's the queen of the underworld. This is a great one here. This is Anubis here, who we associate with the underworld in Kemetic beliefs, but in popular mythology, he was attributed an army, the army of Anubis, the army of these these dead warriors who are fighting on your behalf that cannot be stopped. This is something that we saw from the movie. It's not related directly to any real mythology, other than the mythology that we're developing. We talk about, talk about the dead or the dead army. So this is clearly the second bullet point here: is that you get an undead army, which most of the time cannot be defeated, and that's the army of Anubis. So we would look at Hades would command an army like this, right? Hell from the Norse underworld would command an army like this. And what type of power does that give these gods? Are they defeatable by any of the other deities having control over a never-ending line of warriors? Could Hades ever be defeated? Could Hell ever be defeated? Pinhead, who comes to us from more modern mythology, has control over the dead. We've seen him bring people back to life. He can take someone and create this Cenobite that he is here. So that's absolutely control over the dead. Another very powerful Japanese god of death. So these gods, a Semitic goddess of the underworld. So these type of deities would have that control over the dead. Okay. Another more modern, if you can see that there, that's the White Walker from the head of the White Walkers from Game of Thrones, right? And again, he was building a massive army so big that it threatened to overcome the realm of the living, because it's a constant army. Every soldier that they kill becomes a recruit for them in a way that like other armies don't get. So the army of the dead, that capacity is just amazing. Looking at even some newer mythology, the Frankenstein stories. Frankenstein stories are about reanimating corpses. There is, at its purest form, this is necromancy. They're performing in a scientific way, and we'll get to this. This is again that army of the dead, the Ice Walkers. Look how massive that army is growing. That's the strength of the army. All these guys previously have been fighting against the Ice Walkers, but after death, like that's your unifier. They get dragons, they get mammoths, they get everything. They got bears in there because everything dies. So the power of necromancy, the power of anti-life, it's probably in the end, this is probably what overwhelms everything, right? And this is here. Now the Ankh, I just talked about this. This is used in a ritual that is a ritual of necromancy. This is after the dead. The opening of the mouth ceremony. It's reanimating the mouth, reanimates the eyes and the ears. We're glad because it allows you to eat and hear and speak in the afterlife, but this is a ceremony that you perform on the dead body so that you can reanimate parts of the body so that it can be used. Okay. Now, other versions. Now, we know that Jason Voorhees is some type of an undead creature, which is why he can't die. He was created through magic. So while he himself does not perform necromancy, I believe he's the product of necromancy. And again, the idea that you create these soldiers that even a singular undead soldier or dead soldier can go out and wreak all types of havoc. The Lord Marshal from the Riddick sci-fi movies. He was a wholly half-dead. And whatever process they were doing, you were partially dead. So he again was building this massive army of the dead, or in this case, the partially dead, that he would go on to conquer the rest of the universe. So the idea of the dead conquering is not a new concept, right? We deal with that several times. This is what the White Walker story was. He's doing it in space. This again is from Native Belief Systems, Baycock, and this is a Bone Warrior. And this is an animated warrior, reanimated fallen soldier that they would call upon to fight against their enemies. Again, more of the Skeletal Warriors. This is the girl from The Ring, who I believe she was actually dead herself. She had fallen into that well and she had died herself and came back. So either she's herself practicing a form of necromancy, or someone is that brought this young lady back from the dead, which is why she's a menace to all the rest of us now. Right? Frankenstein, other images of Frankenstein, right? So we kind of understand. And again, vampires fall right into line with necromancy, right? I'm glad we hit on some images of vampires. Vampirism itself is a whole different set of abilities, powers that I'll talk about separately. So I'm not going to get into even the surface of vampire abilities, only in the sense that a bite from a vampire can reanimate, can kill and then reanimate a corpse, which is necromancy. They are controlling, and most of the time, vampires have control of the vampires that they have created. So they are bound to them in some type of vampire bond. So we know that vampires have that ability as well to bring life back to the dead, or bring a version of life to the dead, which again we would call necromancy, right? This is that ability to create their own armies, and they're very powerful. Now we get into like a different way of making undead. Now this is the T virus, which we know from Resident Evil. And what the T virus did is it created reanimated corpses. In this place, it's not even held to humans. This is a dog that's reanimated. But we can see like the whole world falls to this reanimated corpse outbreak that happens in Resident Evil, right? This a similar situation. Now this was a different type of virus, but this is obviously The Walking Dead, where again it was a virus. So the zombie part of it. So even as we're talking about zombies, under the context of necromancy, zombies are created in a couple of different ways. We see zombies that are created through magic. We associate that with Vodon, but there's also zombies who are created by virus. So The Walking Dead talks about this a lot. World War Z, all the new zombie. This series here, iZombie, the creation of a zombie, that form of necromancy comes from a scientific perspective. Now, science obviously has taken two paths to it. The virus, which reanimates the dead, but they've also attempted in Frankenstein type settings to just throw a body together, right? And all of a sudden you've got a living being, right? This is what they used to do with science. They take a corpse, sew it back together, see if you can put enough electricity through it to reanimate it. Now science simply says, like, we're getting in on this reanimation thing. We're doing it through a virus. It's going to be some type of virus either that they create or that just exists. And all of a sudden, and when you really think about it, this isn't that different than what the White Walkers were doing. I mean, the White Walkers were building that same type of push. They were doing a little bit differently. Once you died, that virus was in you. You were going to come back. Same thing with Resident Evil. Once you die, you are now under the realm of the Necromancer. And the Necromancer should not be messed with. Now, the Necromancer seems to be able to go to every realm. I don't care if you're Asgardian. I don't care if you're on Earth. I don't care if you're in space. There's dead everywhere. So this ability to reanimate or communicate with the dead, is particularly having control over them, is a massive game-changing ability. We see who's got this ability. Man, they've all got potential to just take over. If you have an army of the dead, you literally have the greatest opportunity to control the world. If you can get knowledge from the dead, it makes you a more formidable being. So this is what we're talking about, necromancy today. If you have more to add, which I'm sure you do, I didn't think I'd go this long on this piece, but let's talk more about necromancy. We'll break some of these down into smaller components, but I just wanted to kind of get a first touch at looking at necromancy and showing who wields this phenomenal ability.